I'm Stephen Foskett, publisher of Gestalt IT and organizer of Tech Field Day. Today, I've got a special interview with Matt Leib focused on some of the concepts that came up during our recent Cloud Field Day event in November 2021. Matt, it's nice to have you on here.
It's really nice to be here, Stephen.
So you weren't one of the delegates of Cloud Field Day 12, but you paid a great deal of attention and interest in the presentations, and you noticed that there were a few recurring themes throughout the presentations. Containers are maturing and enterprises are using more hybrid cloud and containerized applications. They're also looking at trying to implement multi-cloud and figuring out how they can have both hybrid on-premises as well as public cloud providers, and sometimes multiple public cloud providers, and all the problems that that causes. And finally, orchestration of all these resources is a big challenge. Matt, how would you say, having watched the Cloud Field Day presentations, how would you characterize these challenges?
Well, first of all, let me say it was to my chagrin that I didn't get to attend the Field Day event. I always find them interesting. What we're seeing is a maturation in the industry, both in terms of containers themselves, and as well in terms of the growth from a hybrid cloud environment to a multi-cloud environment. And to me, I think that significance, it's adding levels of complexity into the whole equation, and how enterprises are dealing with incorporating multiple cloud providers into their scenarios, as well as, of course, their on-premises architecture, and what they're going to do, how they're going to manage the prospect of many clouds as part of their environment. To me, I think that we faced the challenge of incorporating a hyperscaler into our native architecture, right? So we've got, who knows, AWS and our own data center as a hybrid environment. But when we go to multi-cloud and we look at them for a lot of reasons, right? The economics alone make the idea of moving workloads from, I don't like to call anybody out in particular, but from one hyperscaler to another, the ramifications, particularly when they reflect on storage infrastructures and network infrastructures, are pretty significant, right? We want to get the benefits of these economics, but we also want to make sure that these architectures are migratable smoothly. Networking particularly is a huge struggle when you look at it in terms of how these architectures look, right? Every cloud provider has a different IP infrastructure, and how do I incorporate those variables into these new changes? And if I migrate from AWS to Azure or GCP to IBM, do I find myself breaking too much stuff, or do I find myself with a methodology where not only could I migrate out from where we are, but back if we want to? There are economic significances to this, and I think about the data egress charges, or the bandwidth charges, or even in some cases the CPU and RAM charges that some cloud providers are asking us to cover. And I think, why wouldn't I want to be able to do those migrations if an accounting system resides in one cloud platform, and my requirement on accounting off of year-end close diminishes? Maybe another cloud provider makes sense. Who knows, right? It's a very complex and convoluted architecture, and made all the more complex by multi-cloud.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into some of these topics in particular, Matt. So, one of the things that, of course, you note, and I think everybody's noting, is that with Cloud Field Day, especially, we're seeing that, in a way, Cloud Field Day might be called Container Field Day or Kubernetes Field Day, because essentially the nature of all of the companies that are presenting at Cloud Field Day is that it's really focused on containerization, microservices, and orchestration. Um, as a practiced enterprise IT person, somebody with a lot of experience in enterprise architecture, what is your take on sort of containerization and container orchestration as the new next generation platform for enterprise applications?
Well, I think that we are at an inflection point. To be honest with you, Stephen, I think that so many organizations are very comfortable with the concept of virtualization today, where years ago we would call them server huggers. Now we call them virtual server huggers. But I think that what you've got is the application development within these organizations that's moving towards a better way to incorporate the development and the microservices side of development into a cloud architecture. And let's be fair, containerization is really the best way to do that, right? The inherent um, microservice architecture makes for a far more dynamic and far less touch oriented kind of concept in terms of mobility in these architectures. So I see a lot of organizations that are split today, where app dev goes into containers, and existing app, or what we might call legacy apps, are residing in a virtualized architecture that isn't containerized. We are seeing some of the sort of nuance of these architectures uh, migrating together. And I know that Tanzu, for a lot of embedded VMware customers, is it's sort of a uh, unique approach towards merging containers and virtualization. But a lot of companies aren't at that point, or don't want to merge these two into one. We do have some solutions in that front that actually allow for migrations and allow for a multi-cloud architecture that goes beyond making that choice. Right, we've got to have some virtualization and some containerization in most of these architectures. And two of the players we saw at Cloud Field Day were Red Hat and Ondat. I would add Memverge as well. The idea here is that the migrations of these solutions really aren't embedded into one containerization side or virtualization side, but whatever the corporation has chosen as the particular platform for these application sets can be ubiquitous, can be regardless of whether it's one side or the other, still be migrated smoothly. I like Ondat's solution very particularly. Actually, I like Prosimo's solution particularly as well. Do you remember the Vplex solution, Stephen?
Yeah, of
From
course. Yeah.
Yada Yada, before it was an EMC product. Um, it put a cache mechanism, in this case a virtualized cache mechanism. Initially the Vplex was a physical device, but that cache mechanism on either side, today it would be a virtual mechanism, allowing for these migrations to take place from site to site. um, Prosimo allows for all those networking components to be sort of bundled up into part of that package and then migrated to the other side and incorporated in a slightly modern or differentiated platform on the other side. That was really cool. I think that OpenShift from Red Hat allows for these migrations to take place because OpenShift is by nature an open platform, allowing for these migrations to exist in multiple sites. Let me mention here Memverge and their App Capsule environment, which is a brand new paradigm for Memverge. I think they're really embracing multi-cloud in a way that their initial product set didn't even consider. And I loved their original product sets. Not that that's gone away, but App Capsule incorporates what they had benefited from a big memory perspective into a multi-cloud environment. I think these are really cool solutions.
Yeah, I think that it's really so clever to think of how companies like, as you said, Red Hat is creating a cloud platform for the enterprise. Certainly, OpenShift has become almost the de facto enterprise hybrid cloud platform. Juniper is talking about integrating enterprise networking all the way from the data center to the cloud in a truly seamless and integrated way. You talked about Proximo. The Memverge app capsule stuff is so cool. And Veeam also, not just with Kasten, but even Veeam themselves are enabling movement of systems from on-premises resources to cloud resources. And to me, I think that is really the next topic, is thinking about how will companies use multi-cloud. You mentioned some use cases for it, but how will they, practically speaking, be able to move applications from the on-premises data center to the cloud?
Well, everybody's got their own solution, right? Veeam is actually leveraging technology they've used for years, and expanding on it quite heavily, right? We have been backing up our architectures, particularly the virtual architectures, using Veeam, and it's that sort of same encapsulation that Veeam has always excelled at, but they're expanding on it so that we can start. And I hate to use the term backup because it seems so legacy, but we can start by encapsulating this data set, these application sets or portions of, and then moving them anywhere and then standing them up. As we've always done, Veeam has given us the ability to place that data anywhere. Well, now we can place it and use it anywhere, and they're really expanding on these architectures as well.
As you're well aware of, the challenges of applications aren't just virtual servers or serverless or something. We also need to consider networking and storage. And that was really evident from Cloud Field Day, because not only did we see cloud platforms, cloud integration, and of course, we're going to talk about cost management as well, but we saw specific approaches toward dealing with storage and networking for cloud applications. And now, as you mentioned with Memverge, this whole new idea of dealing with memory in cloud applications. What is your take on the status of storage in Kubernetes integrated storage?
Well, so that's a multi-layered question, right? Kubernetes, in terms of application sets, is while the networking may not be trivial, the storage itself in just the application side is a fairly simple prospect. But it's the data that's attached to those applications that creates the bugaboo there, right? We've got a small database app with a huge set of data attached to it, and quite honestly, how do we migrate that data so it becomes the same on one side as another? And going back to our previous lives and our storage centric focus, cache coherency, and some of the issues when it comes to terms of data loss and data integrity within that migration process. And when we were seeing the differentiation between a VM, a vMotion, for example, and then a storage vMotion, we would have the question of what data is lost in transit and what transactions were taking place during the time that these apps were migrating. Well, the same sort of physics issues apply here, right? We can't solve physics. Um, I think that Memverge does in a certain extent, because what they're doing is taking that memory in, or that data into memory, and using a snapshotting methodology to move that data from one site to another, thereby being a far faster migration than sort of we've ever been able to do before. But what we are seeing are a number of options coming to play in terms of storage, making these migrations a more simple and a more um, functional process. We have limitations when it comes to this, and those limitations are absolutely physics. There's only so much data that can be transmitted across the wire. And in even other solutions, we've seen a lot of storage providers creating creating solutions where, like for example, if you're in TME, telco, media, and entertainment, and you've got these massive 8K video files that you're trying to work on, you're trying to have a number of users work on them simultaneously. Well, for example, we've seen solutions where you actually grab only the portion that you're working on, and it's constantly creating calls and puts into that data set so that it becomes consistent across the wire. I think we're seeing really cool solutions in terms of how cloud and container management is handling those massive data sets. Now, granted, that wasn't a container-based application in my use case, but it's a significant step forward in how caching mechanisms will handle those things.
So one of the challenges then is not necessarily the mechanisms needed to have continuous storage, continuous networking, or even continuous memory. It's orchestrating all of these resources. And this was another theme that we saw at our Cloud Field Day event. Let's talk a little bit about multi-cloud orchestration and the reality there.
Well, there's a lot going on, right? I look at a variety of solutions, and when we used to talk about orchestration, it was nowhere near as complex as we are today, right? It was, I create my environment and I move it, right? And I have a management platform that allows me to have insight into a given platform today, regardless of where it resides. But orchestration is far more grandiose in multi-cloud, right? We have to look at where that application is residing and what changes as we migrate something from site to site. I looked at particularly with massive interest into this Juniper Contrail solution. In fact, I think you published something, I wrote about it. And Contrail gives this sort of wide scope approach towards really that migration process, and that and how Juniper is handling really a software-defined networking approach within a multi-cloud environment, and it's really very cool. We go over to OpenShift and with Red Hat, and I think that what we're seeing with Ansible as a composable architecture, and OpenShift as a management layer on top of it, is a really nice, robust solution for creating and managing these container operations wherever and however you need to. We're not going deeply into any of these architectures, but they're really great solutions. let's face it, these architectures are they're all coming up with really intriguing solutions about how to handle the needs that are arising, not in a hybrid environment, but in a multi-cloud environment. Of course, they will all step down towards a hybrid, but multi-cloud is a big buzzword in the industry, and multi-cloud is what we need to consider ourselves with today, even if an organization is building an architecture today in sight of what may come. If we're going to build it with a large global view, we really have to consider it as a multi-cloud, potentially multi-cloud environment.
So, Matt, one of the biggest concerns I think that I hear from enterprises nowadays is they're starting to realize just how much all this stuff costs. Because, of course, for the longest time, I think people felt like cloud was a big money saver, an automatic money saver. We don't have to buy all this equipment, we don't have to have the data center. We just use it when we're needing it, and when we stop using it, we don't need it. But I think the reality of that has been quite different. And that leads us to one of the most notable presentations from Cloud Field Day, and that was YotaScale. So tell us a little bit about the cloud cost challenges and what YotaScale is looking at.
Well, the truth is the costs, I think they've been hidden in a lot of cases, right? I highlighted earlier the storage costs, which can be significant, but the egress costs of that storage as well have been sort of hidden behind the scenes. The amount of processor utilization in place, the amount of bandwidth utilization in place, and the amount of memory utilization in place all have costs associated with them. In the long term, a solution where you can actually sort of predict what that might cost in an organization, as opposed to building a greater architecture on premises, including physical servers, including whatever networking might be associated with it, sort of so you can see what the big picture is going to look like and see it over time, is the kind of solution YotaScale is bringing to play. It's very interesting. I find it similar to sort of lesser solutions that we saw back in the day, but taking into account really globalized costs and in a multi-cloud environment. YotaScale has really taken a massive stab at trying to predict what kind of storage or what kind of costs might be associated with all of these aspects, and where, right? And that doesn't mean just beginning your architecture. It also means, after that stuff has been in place, and what it will look like a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. It's a very valuable, from a chief financial officer perspective. If you're an IT manager and you want to approach your CFO, and you can say, we can give you an idea of what this looks like for 5 years, as opposed to the average life duration of physical hardware on premises, and the support and the electricity and the air conditioning, etc. We can actually come up with a far better picture of what things are going to cost in the long run. I think it's incredibly intelligent.
So thank you very much, Matt. One of the things that occurs to me as the organizer of these field day events is that we never have an explicit theme beyond storage or cloud or networking or security, but there always seems to be themes emerging. And as I said at the start, for Cloud Field Day, it really has become Kubernetes and containers and APIs and integration. But for this Cloud Field Day in November of 2021, it really seems to be all about multi-cloud, extending the on-premises data center through hybrid cloud technologies out into public cloud providers, and orchestrating all that and managing costs and building a real true next generation infrastructure for enterprise applications. And it's interesting because, of course, this has been building for years and years, and it will continue as well. We look forward to learning more about these concepts at our next Cloud Field Day event coming up in February of 2022. and our further events throughout the year. Matt, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss what you saw as a audience member, a viewer, somebody who was watching the presentations at Cloud Field Day in November, and also someone who's been contributing articles, as you mentioned, to our website, gestaltit.com.